What do the American Revolution, the history of Catholicism in England, and Catholic fiction have in common? Stick around to find out. I'll be right back. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Gracious Guest Show, and I'm your host, your humble host, Mike Creavey. Everything's over at the website, thegraciousguest.org. That's where I've got some blog posts, different media appearances, presentations, different things like that. And of course, all kinds of different links to previous videos, previous episodes of this show, podcasts on all kinds of different faith, culture, etc. kind of topics. And what we really try to do here is to consider the deeper currents of the faith, especially when you can kind of explore those through film, through literature, through various kinds of fiction, for example. And that's what we're going to look at today in a particular way with our friend Avellina Balestri, who's back. She was on this program a couple months back, almost a year ago already somehow, to talk about a really fascinating Robin Hood historical fiction sort of series she's written called The Telling of the Beads, which you can check out. I have all sorts of links below you should look at to get links to her material, to her work in various different settings. But just to give you a little bit of her background here, if you're not familiar, Avellina Balestri is a Catholic author and editor based in the historic Maryland, Pennsylvania borderlands. Her stories, poems, and essays have been featured in over 30 print and online publications. Avellina is the editor-in-chief of Fellowship and Fairydust, which is a magazine inspiring faith, creativity, and exploring the arts through a spiritual lens. Under its auspices, she had the honor, I should say, of hosting a literary conference commemorating the legacy of J.R.R. Tolkien. That was at Oxford, actually. Avellina believes that the Trinitarian and incarnational mysteries are reflected in all things good, true, and beautiful, and that the image of God is wondrously woven into every human heart. These themes are at the forefront of the stories she chooses to tell. And I'm excited to talk about the next story she's telling, which is a book, depending on when you're watching this, it may already be out in print, but it's soon to be out in print. It's sooner to be out on Kindle. And she's really focusing on the first volume here called Gone for a Soldier in her series All Ye That Pass By, dealing with the really interesting and sort of unknown to many of us struggles of Catholics in England post Reformation period, right? King Henry VIII, the period of the Act of Supremacy, and you think of martyrs like St. Thomas More, John Fisher, and the really difficult and tragic situation that Catholics in England found themselves in progressively more through the 1500s, 1600s. And this particular story then sets us right at the dawn or the pre-dawn of the American Revolution, with characters, many of whom are based on true real life people. They're basically fictionalized versions based on a lot of research Avellina did to really bring them to life, and some fictional characters trying to explore those challenges of how to navigate in a now a hostile environment to your particular worldview, and the different pressures and temptations that come along to get you to go astray. So I don't want to give any more away. We're going to jump right in to my interview here with Avellina Balestri, talking about her new book, Gone for a Soldier. Check it out.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, and it's anyone who saw you here before, which, by the way, that video, so I think we had that titled Catholic Imagination, talking about
Mhm.
your Robin Hood series. We had a lot of fun talking about that. It's hard to believe that was almost a year ago already. And I actually
Yeah,
I
it's
had
hard to
some
believe
folks.
it, isn't it?
I know, yeah. I even had some folks, even like a priest in the Buffalo area, like the random people reach out to me about that because they had like it was neat. They'd been doing a Google search on like Catholic imagination, and that's what came up. So uh, that's just a pitch for everyone watching this. Like, please like this and share this. Like, you never know how that algorithm works um, on YouTube, and how it will like put it in front of people who might be able to get something out of it. So we're just happy to do this. Um, so you're here though. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this new project, which we're trying to help you promote here, right at the time of this first hitting YouTube. We're just a few days away from the release. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this project?
Just
And
to give a little bit of an update, the release has
yeah,
been
yeah.
put back just a little bit
Oh, okay, all
because
right.
so technically now the release is going to be aiming for actually June 27th
Oh, okay,
because
not too far away. So
I
yeah.
It's not too far away. It's still within good reason to be, coming out and doing the advertisement for it. But I just needed to give it a little bit of leeway to do proper editing, because there were some
Yep.
elements that I'm like, nah, it needs proper editing, and I don't want to rush to put out and then regret it later. So, but it is coming very soon.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, no, and I think you had hinted at this when we were talking about the telling of the beads, and like you had hinted about this
Mhm.
kind of grander project you had in mind. So what is the sort of the scope here? What's maybe up front, kind of what's the goal, what's the vision with this, and then we can maybe get into the details a little more of the story and the background of the historical context for the novel.
Sure. So basically, this first book, Gone for a Soldier, is the first of a trilogy that's called All Ye That Pass By. And it deals with a young man named Edmund Southworth who comes from the north of England, and he's from a Catholic recusant family. And the recusants were those who refused to basically join the Church of England. And so were cut off from various areas of society as a result. And it's his journey as he essentially ends up being persuaded to take the Test Act, which is the latter day version of the Oath of Supremacy that's in place in
Hmm.
the 18th century. And he ends up going on Burgoyne's March, or the Saratoga campaign in the American Revolution, as a staff officer for General John Burgoyne.
I
And
see. Yeah.
in the process of all of this, when he's, in this campaign, things get increasingly brutal and destabilized, and everything starts to go to hell in a handbasket on this sort of land Titanic. And this really makes him reevaluate who he is and what he actually stands for, and what is the hierarchy of goods from
Hmm.
lesser to greater goods, and what is the greatest good. So that, in a nutshell, is the premise.
Fascinating. Yeah, and it's I confessed to you before we started that like I try so hard to like to, if there's ever anything for me to read or any homework, I try to get through it in one sense because of just, wanting to know a little bit more about like what we're talking about, of course, but truly, because of the fascinating nature here of this to me, as far as historically,
Mhm.
it's a real area of interest and an area that I'm not particularly up to speed on. Like I haven't studied this too much. I'm more
Mhm.
familiar with the onset of this whole drama, right? Backing up to say, Henry VIII and Thomas
Oh
More, of
yeah,
course, who's very dear to me. And
and
but
most
this now
people
is
are. Most people are.
right. A lot of people have seen A Man for All Seasons. It's one of my favorite
Mhm.
movies that
I,
tells that story in a lot
Me
of ways.
too.
But
I love
right,
the film, and
but this
the
is like
film
two
really
hundred.
inspired me. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm
The
sure.
film has
Yeah,
really
yeah.
inspired me in terms of the writing of this work. In fact, you probably noticed elements
Okay.
of it when you were reading bits and pieces. That A Man for All Seasons was greatly influential in it.
And it's such an amazing, like now, I mean, but historically here you're jumping ahead, 200 and 40 years ish, and that right off the bat caught me. Just these, even the early chapters, that what's it like
Mhm.
now when England, which was this in many ways like this crown jewel of of a Catholic nation, a very rich, deep Catholic history, and oftentimes we forget
Mhm.
that. Maybe talk about that just a little bit as far as how did you or what really brought you to be interested in this? Perhaps is a good question. This particular um, drama, this particular story of the church in England.
Well, what's interesting is that, of course, the last time I was on this program, I discussed the Robin Hood series, and that deals with a very Catholic England. The
Yeah,
whole premise is that you have these characters and these storylines that are just within this richly Catholic universe, and it seems like a given, that this world is Catholic. England is Catholic. Well, of course it's Catholic. It just seems
right.
like such a natural thing. So it's been interesting even for me as a writer to put myself into this new headspace, if you will, of
Hmm.
because I was working on the Robin Hood story for a good 5 years. And so you just almost come to have this sort of natural like thought, well, of course this world is Catholic. And then you suddenly jump ahead and you're like, okay, now not only is it not Catholic anymore, at least not in the way it was, let's put it that way, even though under the
Right.
surface I think it always is. But Catholics are being persecuted, being
Yeah.
suppressed, being marginalized, being treated as foreigners, as traitors, as cowards. I mean, it's a complete
Complete 180.
switch.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. Hmm.
And that is something that just deeply impacts, I think, the entire story, is this sense of like loss. And that's kind of the point of the
Mm-hmm.
title. It's all ye that pass by, attend and see. If there be any sorrow
Mm-hmm.
like unto my sorrow. It's kind of it's a tragedy, really. That's kind of the premise
Yeah.
of this particular trilogy, which I think is distinct from the Robin Hood series, which, even though
Mm-hmm.
it did have elements of tragedy, it wasn't a tragedy, whereas this one is a tragedy per se, not without hope, but it is a tragedy in the kind of the classical
Yeah.
sense.
Well, and again, like without giving away too much, of course, here, like, and that's I'm going to keep trying to resist to give anything, this is like significant plot details away, because we want people to definitely read the book. I want to finish it. I don't want to have it ruined either. But
Yeah.
this, you want to tell us a little bit, just about, so, this main character, um, Ned, of course, he's referred to. So what's,
Mhm.
just maybe tell us whatever you want to, and we can kind of explore this idea of his relationship with Burgoyne here, how this develops, and maybe at the core of that, I'm really interested to talk to you more about this challenge that we really face sometimes, right, in real life, that I think comes alive very
Mhm.
believably in the story, where it's not necessarily, like here I am with my faith, and all of a sudden I'm just completely swept away right away to abandon it or to question
Right.
it. But these realistic things that can happen day by day, right? Relationships with other people, different perspectives that can start
Mhm.
to kind of steer us that direction, and how complicated that can be. So you want to talk about that a little bit, and their relationship, in the story?
Yeah. So Burgoyne, of course, so he's a real historical character. And so it's always been interesting
You have a
trying to
few of
blend
them.
the history.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a few of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
They basically very
Yep.
much weaving in and out. Um, And so Burgoyne really was a Lancashire man. He had ancestry up there. Lancashire was the county with the most Catholics in it. And historically, he actually was more lenient toward Catholics. He was still anti-Catholic. Everybody was. Time period, if you're of the Anglican ascendancy, you're kind of by default anti-Catholic. But
Right.
still, he had more leniency because he was around Catholics quite a bit, because of the recusancy that was prevalent in his ancestral county, and the
Hmm.
county he represented in Parliament. He represented the city of Preston, and so it was just inevitable that he would. And in actual history, he wrote about how he thought the Test Act was a bad idea, and they should be incorporating Catholics into the military. And ultimately, when push comes to shove, he votes for that. He votes for Catholics to get relief acts.
Hmm.
Um, but in this story, we're focusing quite a bit on him and his relationship with this young man, Ned, who is the son of an old friend of his who had lent him a substantial amount of money when he was in need, was in debt, and needed to get helped out of the pits, essentially. And so
Hmm.
it starts out being kind of like Burgoyne, kind of swooping in. He's this very colorful military man and playwright, man about town character. And he basically ends up being, at first just there to kind of repay the debt and to surrogate Edmund a little bit. But then as time goes on, they really do become friends. They become more than friends, even in the sense of like the father-son bond that starts to
Hmm.
develop. And Burgoyne is an interesting and complex, and in this story, it's kind of explored in the sense of him, you know, basically around Ned. He feels good because Ned is this good kid. He's sort of a virgin farm boy. He feels like, and in a
Yeah.
way, in a way, he's almost doomed to corrupt this kid, but there's sort of a tragedy to this because he kind of cares about the kid and he increasingly cares about the kid. And he cares about him for the very reason that he is a good kid, that he has this sort of purity of spirit. He loves him for that. But at the same time, there's this kind of toxic element that he's going to end up corrupting the very thing that he loves for being good.
Mm,
So that's sort of part of the dynamic. And it really kind of plays into Burgoyne in some ways filling in the archetype of kind of the tempter in the story, of trying
yeah.
of trying to get Ned to abandon his recusancy, his Catholic faith, so that he'll follow him into the military. But it's more complicated, of course, because he can't just be reduced to a mere tempter, and you can kind of understand from his perspective what he thinks he's trying to do for this kid. He thinks he's trying to help
Yeah.
him. He thinks he's trying to give him a future. So it's really quite kind of sad, in many ways, their relationship, for the very fact that it is real. It's not just toxic. They really do have kind of a bond that is forged because you have a fatherless son and a kind of a, Burgoyne not having, well, he had one child who died of typhoid fever, his daughter. And so he has this kind of, and well, later on we also find, I mean, he's had a bunch of different situations with affairs and so on and so forth. So there's a number of
Hmm.
children around and that, but his legitimate child, his one legitimate child with his wife, had died when she was like 10, and he never quite got over this. And this is
Hmm.
something that you can kind of see where he has this sort of need to be paternal. And so
Mm,
that's sort of part of it. And so he's like their relationship is essentially a tragedy, in many acts, really. And it just
hmm.
gets more and more so as Burgoyne pulls him into the American Revolution and this doomed campaign, really.
It's so fascinating because that's, there's the it's like this motif I feel, where it does often, right, it is often the case where somebody in our lives, maybe, or maybe us in someone else's life, not to,
Mhm.
not to avoid responsibility here, right? Where we don't take
Yeah.
that responsibility, right, as seriously as we should, or whether we like it or not, we are a role model and someone's going to follow our example, unduly even, and that's there's such a sacred sort of responsibility, of course, that so many of us have, that sometimes we don't take that seriously. But by the same token, it's interesting to me with like Ned's character, that you have this maybe he's not incorruptible, of course, like not technically, but I almost thought of like that line, the fascination that the Joker has, like the Chris Nolan Batman movies. I don't know if he's just like
Yeah.
fascinated by Batman because he's like, you truly are incorruptible. Not to put that on Burgoyne, but there is sometimes even on like the darker side of things, I think, or someone who's somewhat nefarious at least, sometimes like a
Mhm.
genuine interest, and fascination with someone who's really good,
Yes.
or at least a
Yes. It's
confusion. And
almost
I
like
think, yeah,
it almost is like a desire to get back to a certain root point within yourself that before you got corrupted or
yeah.
whatnot. And I mean,
Like you're in
there's a
touch with it
line.
somehow. Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's a line in chapter 3 that I have where Burgoyne essentially says it, to Ned, effectively like, well, I used to be kind of like you. I mean, sort of,
Hmm.
not completely, but I kind of did. And I'm not completely foreign to prayer. And so there's this sense of
Right.
him wanting to be, um more like Ned in a sense, but he knows he's drifted so far from it and been so pulled along by his passions and sort of society that he's been living in and partying in.
Yeah.
So there's
Do do you think it's fair to say that like it's an exploration of the question of those who struggle, well, and I guess we all do, at some point in life at least, or to some degree, but those who really struggle with the question of motivation and kind of how do I want to put it? prioritization, the priority of the fundamental
Yeah.
religious question, or the question of truth. Because it seems to me like, he doesn't seem to have like an immediately, like, at least on the surface level, it's not like a primarily profoundly deep theological qualm. It reminds me a little bit of like, as portrayed in the aforementioned, that Man for All Seasons, when the Duke of
Yeah.
Norfolk is so frustrated with Thomas More, and he says to him about, like, he's like, basically like, we've all signed the thing. Why can't you just do it? Like, there's this frustration of like, buddy, like, this isn't a
Absolutely.
game. Like, they're gonna cut your head off. Like, what's the big deal? And it's like, there's a sincerity there, but it just doesn't get it. It doesn't understand that, like, no, some things are actually worth giving it all away for, worth even dying for, which is ironic because he seems ostensibly willing to do that for England, or for like
Yeah.
the cause, like he has some sense of that loyalty, but it's like it just doesn't compute, right? With something deeper than that.
Yeah. It is. It's basically, well, I'm trying Anglicanism at the end of the day is nationalist settlement. So it's very much
I'm sorry,
about,
can you say that one more time? You cut out just a little bit there for a second. Let me.
sure. Okay, my back.
Yep, no, gotcha. Yep,
My back.
yep.
Okay. It's basically Anglicanism is a nationalist settlement. So it is a nationalist church, and really, what you see up and down, the history of Anglicanism is this emphasis upon, this is how to be Christian as an Englishman, kind of thing. This was the way it
Yeah,
was presented. This
like an
is how to
English
be
translation
a
of
not
Christianity.
foreign,
Yeah,
exactly, not foreign.
yeah.
Um, and so that's in a way why you get characters like Burgoyne, who they can understand like loyalty to king and country, and they're not like again, the point with Burgoyne is that he wasn't, I mean, even the historical one too, not even just the sort of the fictionalized exploration of him, but the historical one, I mean, he was a Christian. He identified as such. He said that his consciousness of Christianity is, for example, what made him very opposed to war crimes. It made
Mm-hmm.
him have these lofty sentiments about, like, when once he was on like a tribunal to over
Mm.
war crimes, and essentially somebody said, well, I was ordered, and he said, you should have disobeyed because you should have listened to a higher law. So he
Yeah.
wasn't like, I think that's one of the interesting things.
He's
You find this in his
anticipating Geneva
poetry.
Conventions and stuff there too, right?
Yeah,
Or the
very
Nuremberg
much so.
trials.
Very much
Yeah.
so. He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. I think Burgoyne as a character often gets limited to either just being a party animal or just being the guy who made some bad military calls. And
Yeah.
it's not, he was a very multifaceted and very interesting character, and he had a scholarly side. And actually, writing him, one of the things I connected to particularly was his role as a writer, because
Hmm.
he was fundamentally an author and a storyteller. And he wrote some very interesting things about the process, which I actually found very relatable, including the fact that all stories, he basically said, all art that you're trying to put together, even the most sort of light entertainment, should have some kind of connection to truth, to sense, to nature. That there's
Hmm.
something in which every story should have some kind of foundational thing that relates to reality. Nothing is sort of just frivolous. Everything must
Yeah.
have some connection to, and I mean, so it's just he wasn't just a frivolous guy. There was a sense
Sure.
of him really having that going for him. And yeah, so but it is a thing though that I feel like he couldn't get deeper than a certain point when it came to the religious elements.
Hmm.
It was one of those things where he was an Anglican Christian. He wasn't a deist even, like deism was pretty popular at the time, but he was actually a Christian. He
Sure.
was an Anglican Christian, just very poorly disciplined one.
Yeah.
But
Not
he
not very
was one.
pious. Yeah.
No, no,
Yeah.
but he was one, and he but I don't think he ever understood the Catholic situation really for what it was. He still had some sympathy for Catholics, like what they went through and stuff, but he never understood, like, why are you standing out exactly? Why are you willing to die on this hill? I don't understand. Like, it didn't make sense
Hmm.
to him. That's why
Yeah.
Ned is an enigma that this young man should be holding to this and have these strong convictions.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it really is
and
something that
to
perplexes him.
and like a quintessential English material. I mean, Ned loves,
Yeah.
like, loves what Burgoyne loves too, or like it has this very fascinating respect for the king, and deference
Hmm.
for him. That was interesting too, because I thought about how this. I don't know if at any point you thought of this, but I don't know why, but Daniel jumped to my mind from the Old Testament. A little
Yeah.
bit with this idea of, because I've been reflecting on him a little bit lately. We named our son Daniel. He's a couple months old now.
Oh, nice.
He's the newest addition since you and I we did an interview last summer. But Danny, like,
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah, no, but Daniel, like, in the Old Testament, I've always loved his story, and it's in a time where I think a lot of us, sincere Catholics, at least from time to time, maybe sometimes more than others, have our serious, deep set, feelings of resentment or upsetness, or just being feeling kind of lost in the conversation sometimes with certain, like, leadership, or certain administrations, or certain, like, governmental or societal
Mhm.
trends we see in our nation that we're very much at odds with. Sometimes it's difficult, right, to find
Yeah.
that, like, like, I'm Catholic, but, like, I love my country, but my country's doing these things. And so I find
Yeah.
with Daniel, there's a real, I feel like, patron in that idea of the sense of, like, I'm, like, well, like Thomas More said again, right? I die, the king's true servant, but
Mhm.
God's first. So there's something in there, I think, about priorities that Ned, it's striking to me. He's, even though you're here, you have the king, or these institutions that represent in some ways the threat to everything he holds
Yeah.
dear. He seems to have this deeper sensibility that that threat is not, it doesn't start with those institutions or with that king. It starts with the devil.
Yeah.
you know and it's these are fellow human beings. This is my king. This is my situation. I'm going to try to show that respect, but there's a
Well,
line in
and
there
also
somewhere
it's
for
the
me.
fact. Yeah, and I mean, it's also the fact that Ned realizes that all of these people and situations are part of this chain that is connected to the
Sure.
original split. But frankly, a lot of these people are better than the people from the original split. They just inherited this. And so
Yeah.
it's sort of like this is like, so for example, I mean, George III was a very pious Anglican,
Yeah.
a world's better person than Henry VIII, but he's
Right.
inherited this, and this is
Yeah.
something that he believes in because he's inherited it. This is his world. This is what he's been raised to see
Yeah.
his coronation oath as being, and his various roles as the king. He
Right.
sees it as, so that is sort of a dichotomy as well, where it's like you've got people who are frankly better than people who started this mess, but they also
Hmm.
inherited it and they're kind of carrying it on. So there's that element I think that Ned recognizes, but also
Sure.
the element of, yeah, very much so, the idea of trying to figure out how he makes sense of where he is in relation to this ancient lineage he himself has to
Yeah.
England, to, I mean, he comes from a noble family. And he can
Right.
trace back, the knights who fought at Agincourt and so forth, and it's something that can't just be easily, like, disposed of. He has to find some kind of a way to make sense,
Yeah.
to try to balance it somehow. But he is living like almost a split because of everything's sort of
Yeah.
broken apart because of the schism. So
Well, and
it's
Burgoyne
very,
takes that so seriously too, with the, when Ned has that dust up with the, again, not to give too much away, but when Ned has that dust up with the landlord, hitting on the,
yeah,
not hitting on, but hitting the girl, trying to find where the priest is hiding, and they have that little dust up, and the landlord hits Ned, and Burgoyne is just, like, furious, like, in the aftermath later, the idea of, like, you have noble blood, and like, I mean, that's, like,
yeah,
it's one thing, I think, for like Americans. Sometimes it's funny, I feel like we are fascinated with this sort of the British monarchy thing, ironically enough. I don't know if it's a cultural artifact or what, but I've never, I don't know about you, but I've never once been to the store in my entire, 40 years of life where there wasn't some magazine with something about the British
Yeah.
royal family on it, right? So there's this interest in it,
Hmm.
but we don't really, I don't think we culturally really think about that seriously as far as like noble blood.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's hard to step into that. So that's an interesting thing that Burgoyne is walking the walk, so to speak, with defending Ned and trying to have that sort of respect for him, even though they have this difference, of course, in their faith. He really
Right.
looks, seriously at that nobility aspect here, which was intriguing.
Well, it's because, I think that it really is. We've sort of culturally forgotten what this stuff even meant or means
Yeah.
in cases like, I mean, what's interesting is that I actually incorporated some actual words. I have a friend of mine who's is actually part of the British aristocracy, broke, but part
Okay.
of the British aristocracy. And so some of the stuff that he's actually told me, he's Catholic too. I incorporated
Okay.
it into
Do
the
they
the
know that?
story
No,
a
I'm
little
just
bit. So some of it, like the idea of like some of the discussions about like what does like being noble or having noble lineage even mean in a
yeah.
context of, say that you don't have power anymore. Well, what does it mean? You still have responsibility even if you don't have the same kind of power. It's kind of,
Sure.
there's an understanding. It's like how you can't, like, there's the idea, this is medieval idea too, you can't get rid of king's blood. If you have king's
Mm,
blood, you have king's blood. Same thing with the idea of noble blood. And I think it's very interesting because, you see, we've sort of been trained to view this as unfair. Like, some people are born this way, some people aren't. But then again, when you
right.
think about it,
Like a
there's so many
privileged
things that
thing
we're
or something.
born
Yeah.
into. Yeah, we're born
Sure.
into
Yeah.
that, we don't actually do anything to deserve it or gain it or anything like that. Even like
Right.
everything ranging from ethnicity to appearance to everything else. I mean, there is just a sense of we are not completely in control of our own fate. What I think that the Christian way of coming at these notions would be to say, well, no matter how you're born, no matter what role you're born into, you have responsibilities. Can you think back about Saplings of Sherwood? Actually, remember when Alfric talks to Robin? He has a
Hmm.
similar talk, really. It's in a way the two stories kind of have overlap.
Yeah.
So you have the idea of Alfric, who's this just lord figure, and he's trying to teach his son how to, be a noble inner that's actually Christian.
Hmm.
And you have a similar situation going on with Ned, who also has a father who teaches him in the same way. Like, courtesy, Ned, courtesy. That's how, and then, so there's this element of, that's how they're going to know that you're a noble, and responsibility, because it's a matter of,
Yeah.
as you were saying with that one scene, he's sticking up for someone else who's in a more vulnerable position. So that is fundamentally, it's a matter of kind of the idea of being called by God to something that's actually beyond yourself.
Hmm.
And it kind of ties in. I'm not sure if you got to this section either, but basically we're talking about, um, George III had this understanding too, because he was a pious Anglican, and he rather famously in his Book of Common Prayer, where they would say like the prayer for George, our gracious king. He
Hmm.
crossed it out and he put George, a miserable sinner. But basically, there's a kind of an awareness. The idea is to be that you inhabit a role. You
Hmm.
you are the king, or you're a noble or whatever. But that doesn't let you off scot free as far as being an individual. If anything,
Yeah.
it just makes you have to work harder because you have more responsibility. So
Yeah.
that's sort of, I think, the kind of cornerstone of a lot of that.
Hmm. Well, I'm unfortunately, we only have a couple minutes left here. This is flying by, but I want to just, give you the opportunity, just to make sure. I mean, I can arbitrarily come up with questions left and right and all kinds of things to talk about, but, is there, maybe like the big picture here with this series. You said it's going to be the plan is to do 3 books here. What would you say are maybe some of the overall most important, most significant goals you have with the story? Um, to just communicate to people. Is it primarily a desire that they would be more interested to investigate this particular time period, or is it more of like the spiritual themes within it? How do you kind of approach that as far as your own goals, or is it just you're just trying to tell
Yeah.
the story that comes to you? I'm just curious, kind of your big picture.
Yeah. Fundamentally, I mean, I've always been interested in the era, in the 18th century, the military campaigns, the American Revolution. And I mean, I do remember 2 books I read in my teens in succession to each other. One was Occurrences During the Late American War by Sergeant Roger Lamb, which was a memoir from a British soldier who fought in the Saratoga campaign. And the
Hmm.
other one was The Autobiography of a Hunted Priest by Father John Gerard.
Wow.
And that was all about a priest during the Elizabethan persecution who escaped from the Tower of London. So
Wow.
these 2 books, reading them in succession, I feel like that was the kind of the germ that we
Yeah.
planted way, way, way back that became this story. Um, but but yeah, I mean, I always was interested in the fact that there is a lack of kind of awareness of the situation of Catholics in the time period. So that was something that was a motivation. I would say, in terms of thematically, I wanted to do Saratoga because it was the turning point of the war, and it had this, certainly from when looked at from the British vantage point, it was a real horror movie. And so the
Mm.
idea was that this sort of horror backdrop, because there was so many layers of it, in the wilderness and wolves and starvation and cannonade and fatal
Hmm.
ambition and everything going very, very, very wrong, that it would be a great opportunity to kind of highlight everyone's spiritual uh, wherewithal, because everything was going so very wrong, and because you have this sense of almost like the fall of empires.
Hmm.
You get this sense of the sort of the boast of earthly things kind of coming undone, and then everyone needs to sort out in different ways, whether it's Ned, who has his main kind of pilgrimage journey in the story, but then there's all these other characters throughout the story that you've already picked up on part of it, reading,
Hmm.
seeing the different characters who already have been showing up. But you basically get this sense that all of these characters, that they are part of the sort of all ye that pass by effect too. All of
Hmm.
these characters are passing by, and they all have to somehow make their peace with God, each and every one of them, in one way or another. They need that is sort of the ultimate. They're going to have to do that if they, they're not going to be able to get away from God, in a sense. If you want, it's almost like the Hound of Heaven
Yeah.
effect in a way.
Right. None of us
So
can.
it's like
Right.
the disaster. Exactly. The
Yeah.
disaster is in and of itself almost like God shouting to them in some way. That's kind of the
Yeah.
way that I was coming at it. And so you have all of these characters who must figure out what their economy of goods is. Again, it's that whole, what are the greater and what are the lesser goods. So yeah, so that's kind of, I think, the main theme. And also, I mean, I guess with regards to Ned in particular, of course, Edmund is named after both Edmund the Martyr, who was
Hmm.
the king from the Dark Ages who was killed by Vikings, to and Saint Edmund Campion. So
Campion.
in
Yeah.
a
Sure.
way, Edmund Campion, the Jesuit martyr, the Ned's story. This was another conceit, sort of, was that Ned's story is essentially Edmund Campion's story retold, but with a layman, and
Hmm.
not with a scholastic background, but with a military background. So it's
Okay.
sort of a remix, but it has a lot
Yeah.
of elements of Saint Edmund Campion's story. So that, I think, is something that
Sure.
will maybe hopefully get people more familiar with Campion's story as well, which would be nice.
Well,
Who
that's
might not ordinarily read the English Martyrs, but maybe they'll read this because it's coming at it from a different angle.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, Avelina, there's so many more questions I want to ask you, but I know we gotta cut it short there for now. But I've got links below for people to check out. Definitely want to, depending on when they're watching this, the book may or may not be available yet. But any other
It
links
is
or
available.
things you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I just want to let everyone know it is available. Currently, you can go buy it on Kindle, pre-order it. So, in other
Uh-huh.
words, it's there for pre-order. You can pre-order it on
Sure.
Kindle. At this point, it will be most likely coming out on June 27th, because I'm in the edits process, in the great edits
Yeah.
process. But yeah, so that's underway. And hopefully that will, it'll be in both digital and paperback once it's finally
Sure.
launched.
Once it comes
So
out,
it
great.
will be
Yep.
available for purchase. So
Wonderful. Well,
yes,
Avellina
definitely.
Balestri,
And
yeah, no, but I'll keep directing people there for sure. So, but
thank
yeah,
you.
thank you
I
so much. I
appreciate
really
it.
appreciate you coming on and having this chance to chat more, and I'm sure we'll catch up again before
Oh,
too long. So,
thank you so much for
yeah,
having me on as well, and thank you for reading it as far as you did. I always appreciate
yeah.
feedback on
Well,
process
that's like I
stuff.
was
Thank
trying to
you.
tell you earlier. It's a real testimony to your writing and just it really kind of hooking me because I can't believe I made it that far yet just with how crazy it is. Like I can't ever read for more than like 2 or 3 minutes at a time
Oh yeah.
around my house. Everybody just but yeah, it's a really good read. It really just grips you. It does truly. So well done. Thank you so much.
Oh well, thank you so much as well, and you have a
Yeah,
great day. And you,
you too. Take care.
okay? God bless. Thank you.
She's so much fun to talk to. She was just so intriguing, in her perspective, and really has obviously thought these things through a lot. And she really does, I think, a tremendous amount of research. It really comes across when you read Avellina's books that she is just a phenomenal writer, and I'm really, really always excited, basically to navigate her work and to really kind of enter into the world that she's presenting. I just think it really jumps off the page, really makes you feel part of the story. You can really relate, and so I'm delighted to promote this book to all of you. Like I said, I haven't finished the whole thing yet. This particular volume, I'm really excited to. It's really getting good, and I really encourage you to check out the links below, as I said before. So thank you so much for stopping by the Gracious Guest Show, for supporting this. Please like and subscribe and share this far and wide. Feel free to get in touch with Avellina too if you want. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.